Thank you, Ruth. I'm going to offer some thoughts and build on the wonderful remarks of my colleagues on the stage. Before I do, just a reminder, for those of you who are NTA members, you should stay after my remarks. For those of you who are principals and others who are not, you can head back to your buildings right away. So that's how we'll finish. It's been said by my colleagues on the stage that we're living in divisive, difficult, and even discouraging times. The events in Charlottesville feel incomprehensible and even overwhelming. Many of us wonder, how could this happen in 2017? It's an important and unfortunate reminder that racism and prejudice are still present and very real. We have not escaped our nation's or our world's past, and it's a wake-up call for all of us that we must be prepared to stand up against racism, bigotry, anti-Semitism, and words and acts of hate. When we are living in such times, the work, your work, inevitably, as Mike said, becomes much more complicated. Jim Ryan, Dean of the Harvard Graduate School of Education, recently noted, "What happens at home, in the media, and in the political sphere makes its way into schools, affecting policies, classroom conversations, and relationships among students. While it makes our work more challenging, it also gives us a greater sense of urgency." I think it is incumbent upon each of us to think about what we can do within our sphere of influence to address issues of prejudice, discrimination, and racial equity. At the same time, we are charged with exposing our students to multiple perspectives. And I don't recall a time when the tension between these two goals were so striking. Rick Weisbord, also of the Harvard Ed School, recently captured the complexity of this work. He wrote, "Educators need to confront dilemmas at the heart of our democracy, dilemmas that we rarely take on squarely in schools at any level. These conversations require teachers to navigate among basic human and democratic rights. Important as it is for teachers to promote the right to free speech and encourage multiple views, teachers also need to promote students' rights to freedom from discrimination." While the millennial generation, and we have some in this room, ages 18 to 34, gives us hope regarding their views on sexual orientation and gender identity, I think it is naive to think that our students' perspectives on race will automatically be different than prior generations. In a major study recently released that I looked at this summer from the University of Chicago, a majority of the millennial generation now supports same-sex marriage. However, I was struck that in the same survey, millennials are similar to older Americans in that they are divided by race as to whether they think racism is still a big problem in our society. This tells me that we have work to do with our students, which means that our focus on addressing racism must be unrelenting. Preparing our students to address issues of justice and racial equity while appreciating a range of perspectives is indeed a daunting task, yet essential if we want our students to thrive in a country that is better than it is today. So what's that going to require? First, it requires all of us to ensure that we are explicit about teaching our students to be empathetic and kind. Ryan suggests that we should be more intentional about naming empathy as a goal, because he says that empathy is not just a fortunate byproduct of studying history or literature. In some ways, it's the most important byproduct. As I visit your buildings, I'm struck by how often empathy is a theme of your discussions, whether it be in a morning meeting at an elementary school, the discussion of a YA novel at the middle school level, or the examination of multiple viewpoints in a high school class. Regardless of your role, our students benefit from your modeling, coaching, caring, and compassion. Second, we must teach our students to be genuinely curious about different perspectives and to be active listeners, even to opinions they may find offensive. Weisbord says that we need to teach our students to talk across the aisle. This issue was magnified this past year at Middlebury College when a group of students physically attacked a controversial speaker and prevented him from speaking because they so strongly disagreed with his views. Commentator Van Jones argues that students need to be deeply aggrieved and upset and then learn how to speak back. It is my hope that Newton Public School graduates will not silence dissenting opinions, but instead engage in fearless discussions with those whom they disagree over the content of their ideas. This will only happen if they get lots of practice during their K-12 years. Third, we need to ensure that our students stand up when they see acts of discrimination, whether it be far away or right here at home. As Martin Luther King said in his letter from a Birmingham jail, injustice anywhere is a threat to justice everywhere. Some of you were upstanders on the Common just a couple of weeks ago. And last year, it was heartening to see so many of our students at Newton North stand up following the alarming Confederate flag incident. The thoughtful and peaceful rally organized and attended by more than 500 students, there were faculty there as well, was a signal that powerful lessons learned in the classroom can be applied in meaningful ways to real-life situations. So how do we ensure that our students are empathetic, curious, and able to engage in difficult discussions while maintaining the capacity to stand up to injustices? I think it is helpful to think about what we are doing both district-wide and in our schools and classrooms. As I reflect on my role, I need to think about what I can do to uphold our values, and as I did last year, speak out against actions that threaten the physical and psychological safety of our students, staff, and families. I want to take a moment right now to acknowledge Seti, who has never hesitated to speak out when he sees injustices, and he has been such a strong advocate for equity and inclusion in our schools throughout his 8 years in office. On behalf of our entire staff, thank you. I also want to thank our school committee members who have been so supportive of our district goals over the past several years, including addressing issues of equity, and I'm especially grateful for the service of 4 members finishing their terms this year: Margie Ross-Dector, Ellen Gibson, Matt Hills, and Angela Pitter-Wright. Thank you all. Now, more than ever, we must be intentional about the work we are doing in relation to race, equity, and social and emotional learning. To that end, we have greatly expanded our professional learning opportunities at the elementary and middle school levels, and many of our schools have established responsive school teams to align school-wide expectations with instruction and support for students in meeting non-academic goals. We have also engaged in important work around courageous conversations on race with our administrators over the last couple of years. In this past year, 7 elementary and middle school teams participated in a workshop on courageous conversations, and they're excited to share that work this year with their colleagues. Additional school teams will participate in these workshops in this upcoming year. And for me, it's particularly gratifying to know that this work is being led by leadership teams at the building levels, as it allows many of you to be involved in shaping our district-wide work. In reflecting on these promising initiatives, it is critical that they be experienced as one united effort to create a school system that is culturally responsive. After all, part of having a responsive and supportive school system is truly knowing our students, which includes their backgrounds, experiences, and cultural identities. If we define our responsive schools work as encompassing a deeper understanding of our students as a whole, we can ensure that they all feel connected and supported in our schools. Adult learning is an integral way in which we can meet the needs of the diverse learners in our schools and address the inherent biases and limitations that we all possess in dealing with those different than ourselves. And students can sometimes be our best teachers. Over the past couple of years, faculty members at both high schools have had the opportunity to hear from students from different races and identities about their experiences and how faculty can better support their needs. Specifically, there were terrific sessions in which the voices of students of color, immigrant students, and transgender students were heard clearly by the high school faculties. I have had the chance to sit in a number of these sessions, and they are indeed powerful and inform our work as we go forward. Peer-led conversations on race and identity are also a tremendously effective learning tool. At our middle schools, through the Anti-Defamation League's World of Difference program, a group of students from each school were trained to lead activities and discussions with their peers on issues of bias, and I'm delighted to report that this pilot was really successful and will continue in the coming year. In addition, a team of students at Newton South, in partnership and support from faculty and administrators, did a terrific job presenting anti-bias lessons to their peers over the past year. Classroom conversations about race led by adults are especially important right now when so much of the exchange among young people takes place online. Having these difficult conversations face-to-face is not easy, but it is essential if we want our students to understand that racism continues to be a real issue everywhere, including our own backyard. Last year, the 7th grade English team at Brown Middle School created a modern racism unit that shifted the focus of their discussion of Mildred Taylor's Roll of Thunder, Hear My Cry, from a historical fiction account of the Jim Crow South to modern-day racism. Students then selected an independent reading book focused on modern racism, and this led to rich discussions on a topic that had not previously been addressed in their classes. While not all of you will necessarily have the opportunity to shift your curriculum to address issues of modern racism, I encourage you to think about ways in which you can make your content even more responsive to our current social realities. We also want our students to express well-reasoned, and Mike talked about this, evidence-based opinions through multiple platforms. At the elementary level, we increasingly have students write persuasive opinion pieces. Trust me, I know some of them are sent to me. But as we provide these valuable opportunities for students to express their own opinions through writing, discussion, and conversations, we must also provide enough space for students to actively listen, particularly to those voices in the minority, whether it be racial, ethnic, religion, gender, or even political. Last year, both of our high schools took time to reflect on the classroom of school experiences of students who supported the current president, which was not always easy for them. I know it is hard for some of you to be hopeful right now. You are not alone if you look at the news and feel discouraged. Earlier this month, I had the great pleasure of meeting the legendary civil rights leader, John Lewis, Congressman John Lewis, a close ally of Martin Luther King and the only surviving organizer of the March on Washington. Many of you know that he led the marchers across the bridge in Selma before he was severely beaten, a day we now know in American history as Bloody Sunday. I asked Congressman Lewis how he was feeling given recent events, and he looked right at me, I'll never forget this, and he said, "Trust me, things are going to get better. We've worked too hard for that not to be the case." Later that day, after I'd sent the wonderful photo of John Lewis and my son to half the world, I was struck by something he said not too long ago. If you're not hopeful and optimistic, then you just give up. You have to take the hard, hard look and believe that if you're consistent, you will succeed. I'm struck by his words about consistency. For me and for our district, that means our focus on equity and justice must always be an integral part of the work we do with our students. John Lewis has probably been a civil rights leader for a longer period of time than anyone in our nation's history, and he has seen our nation at its best and at its worst. Yet, he remains optimistic. My optimism stems from the passion, skill, and energy that all of you bring to 13,000 students on a daily basis. Thank you for the powerful and amazing work you do on a daily basis, and have a wonderful year.